So for the next part of this, we are going to apply a hard ground to our test strips. This is going to be a line etching test strip, so we need to apply a hard ground to it. There are several types of hard grounds. The kind that we're going to use, and which is very common, is this universal etching ground from Graphic Chemical. You can tell that this is hard ground because of the red lettering here for hard. They also make a similar can. It's the same can. It looks identical, except it would say soft. And that would have more of a characteristic where the beeswax, there's probably more beeswax in the consistency of it so that it never fully dries. Hard ground really consists of three things. There is asphaltum, which will harden. It's free floating in a solvent, and the asphaltum will harden on a plate, and it serves as a good acid blocking, acid resistant ground, but it's also very brittle, so it will chip if you begin to draw on it by itself. So they add beeswax to this, but the beeswax is too soft. So if you have just beeswax, which alone is also very good at resisting acid, that will be too soft, and so it's easy to move. The characteristic of the lines might close in under pressure, things like that. So finding the right consistency is important with your hard ground. And the other thing that they add to this is rosin. So rosin is very hard. It's the hardest of all three of those things. And so the right balance makes it so that it's not too brittle, it's easy to draw through, and it's very protective of the plate. So it's a nice protective ground or coating. These cans I set aside because they've been contaminated slightly. Even just a small amount of contamination with these is fairly easy to do because we have our parts washer here where we clean our plates, and oftentimes students might come in here and they might not have a foam brush to apply their hard ground. So what they would do instead is look around for one, and they might find one of these old brushes that were kind of left behind, and that they might try to use one of these, but they'll find that it's very hard, and so their hard ground will be streaky. They might try to find another one that has been in here, and you don't really know what people have done with them with these brushes. So some of them might be contaminated with this solvent, which does not work well with the hard ground. So the only time that I would ever use a solvent with a hard ground is if the hard ground in my container has, maybe I left the top off and it's become too thick and I need to thin it out. So I would use naphtha spirits for that. That's really the only thing that we use naphtha for in this studio. There are some other alternative types of grounds that you can use. We do have ball ground, hard ground, and soft ball ground. So we've got a couple different types, and those you would put your plate on the hot plate, turn it up to I think around 225, I'm not sure, about 200 it says here, above 200. And so that would naturally start to melt. There's times when I might use that instead of the liquid hard ground, but for you guys I wouldn't worry too much about that. There's also big ground, which is very nice, but it's a little bit safer. It doesn't use some of these chemicals, but it's a little bit more expensive, and it comes in smaller tubes, so it's not as readily available to us as this is. So we've got some of this. It's available at the school store. So I need a container. I don't necessarily want to use one of these old containers. I'll keep these around for a little bit to use if I'm stopping out an image. Maybe I'll even keep these for a little bit, but I need a small container, so I always have a little stash in here, and I just want to find something that's not too funky. That's got to get washed. I will take those out. Here we go. Here's one. I bring a lot of different jars in, so you know, there's always something that you can use. If you need to clean one out, you know, just use soap and water, but you need to have this fully dry, so make sure that you dry it out before you put the hard ground in. So I'm going to try and carefully add some hard ground to this without spilling, which would be nearly impossible for me because I just don't understand how these containers work. And my students know that I will continue to gripe about bad design in printmaking supplies. Also, this parts washer is very poorly designed with the latch on it. Okay, so I'm going to soak just the tip of my brush, and I want to make sure that I don't have too much, so I'm going to tilt it and allow the excess to kind of drip out, and then I'm going to hold my brush parallel with the ground so that I don't drip. I want to be careful not to drip on anybody else's plates as well, so I don't want to kind of drip over top of them. And I'm going to come over and try and do this in as few strokes as possible. It looks like I can get full coverage here, and I'm just going to apply a little bit of pressure, not too much, and slowly bring that across. You can see that this amber color is very thin. I'll try and get a little bit closer. That is a very thin layer. As your hard ground begins to be exposed and some of the solvents begin to evaporate, your hard ground will start to thicken over time. And sometimes if you apply just one stroke like that, it would be very dark. So you have to kind of manage how dark you want your hard ground to be, how thick you want it to be. If it's too thick, it will become brittle, and when you start to incise your lines into the hard ground, you might find some chipping that occurs. So you don't want it to be too thick, and if it's too thin, then when we put this in the acid, you'll notice that some of these areas, I can see a little bit of light area right here, where this is not a proper amount of ground to be able to resist the corrosive effects of the nitric acid. So I'm going to have to apply a second, third, maybe even fourth layers. But what would happen is this will begin to get thinner and thinner, and I will see where the zinc is exposed, and the nitric acid will start to foul bite around those areas that are exposed, the zinc that is exposed. So I'm going to probably put 3 or 4 layers on this. And I'm just letting it dry for a minute in between. You can see the beginning of the stroke is usually lighter, the ending of the stroke is usually a little bit darker. There's several ways that you can do this. Some people prefer to pour the hard ground over the plate and allow it to drip into a container like this. I just find that kind of messy. There's also a method of smoking your hard ground where yes, you'll end up with an amber color like this. This is pretty good right here. And to darken that up, you would smoke it with a candle, and you would hold it upside down with a rack, and you would just hold the candle underneath, and the soot will adhere to the hard ground and darken it so that you can see very clearly your mark making when you're drawing. I'm going to go ahead and apply this layer this way. And I can tell some of the edges are going to need little touch-ups. I don't worry too much about the edges until before I put them in the acid. I'll take a look and just make sure that I covered the edges properly as well. And I'll just touch it up with a little bit of a small brush usually. So I'm just letting that dry again for another 30 seconds or a minute. It's getting there. Some people might prefer this. I prefer it a little bit darker. My style tends to be a little bit more aggressive on a plate, so I don't have to be as careful about. I make a lot of revision and edits. That may have waited a little bit too long for that one. So I'm just gonna finish this up. Okay, that should be fine. You can see it's kind of beating up a little bit. It might be drying a little bit irregularly. Okay, I'm gonna leave that alone. That's fine for now. This is for this process. And okay, so this is gonna dry for a little bit. I will, however, not sure whose that is. I will in the meantime though pour off the excess. You know, if there's other people who are working on this project as well, I might ask the group if they need to use some Hardground and if they need to use a foam brush while it's fresh. I don't typically recycle them because I just don't like to take the risk of that. Some people do use mineral spirits and just use a lot of mineral spirits and clean this out, but I do find that you do use a lot of mineral spirits doing that. So I'm going to leave this out for students. I'll probably leave this out for students as well, but I can take this container and wipe it out. You might want to put on gloves before you do this. You want to try not to get this on your skin as well. You could potentially get a slight chemical burn if you have this on your skin for, you know, a long period of time. But if I just do this, I can reuse that container again, and I don't have to worry about the thick, dried, hard ground interfering with the way that it looks. Okay, so I'm also going to show you how to remove your hard ground. Say, you know, you can tell that this was very thick. I showed students how to use a hard ground that I didn't realize at the time was contaminated, and you can see all these little pebbly things in there. I think that's probably rosin that's been kind of beaded up together. So I'm going to place that in there. I'm going to grab a pair of gloves. I love these because I can slip them right on and off. If I need to, I can just kind of shake my hand and it'll come off. These are great for the acid and great for this. I also use the same ones for wiping my plates. So I'm going to put that right there, and I would take a toothbrush and just begin to remove the old ground on here. And this is a nice way of doing it, so we're not, you know, putting any solvents down the sink. This will take all the hard ground and contain it, and then we will, you know, have this removed at a later date and it will be recycled. Okay, so that's pretty good. I will let this drip dry. I'll turn that off. When I'm done in here, I like to close this up. And when I'm ready to move around, I will hold my plate parallel, and that will prevent any dripping. So again, I'm just gonna take some paper towels. Remove all the excess that I can. So you might have to do this if for some reason you need to remove your hard ground. And there's a lot of times when you might want to do that. You might need to do that with your aquatints. You might need to, well, you're going to do that before you print. I'm going to take this plate, and again, I'm going to degrease it. So I'm going to take my Ajax or my Comet and just go through. Now I noticed when I removed this hard ground, during the demo yesterday, I showed a very small section of the plate. You can see that's just from where I touched it just now. Just a little bit more. And up close you'll be able to see this in just a second. Now, you can see a small line, a small section of line where I had made a few lines with my etching needle through the ground. And so you can see those on this plate. I'm not too worried about it, but some people really like to have their image be pristine. I'm not sure if that would print. It might print very, very delicately. But I'm not too worried about small sections like that because my imagery tends to get pretty crowded and there's a lot of noise and speckling and things like that. So I don't really worry about little sections like that because I just think it kind of adds to the character of my work. But, you know, if you wanted to remove that, you would have to probably polish it with that Putz pomade. And so I would get that out and do that. I'll do a demo about that at a later date for making revisions on your plate. But now I'm going to replace the hard ground and with a fresh hard ground, and we would be ready to go. Okay, so I'm going to leave that alone for now though. Now, I do have another plate that's almost ready. You can see I didn't quite get the edges here, but I would touch that up afterwards. Now, when you're doing your line etching, I have a little grid that I have set up here. I think I was using this one. No, I was not. So we'll do this fresh. Now, here are a few samples that I have, and you can see how this is broken up. I'll explain the corrosive effects of nitric acid and how that works with your plate later, but on the wall over here I have a little diagram that says line etching times: 1 minute, 2 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 20 minutes. There's a lot of sections and it goes all the way up to 120 minutes. Usually you can break your plate up into 8 or 9 sections, and you basically will double your times, and you want to get to about 60 minutes. A lot of students tend not to go to 60 minutes with their zinc plate etchings, but I would recommend that you try to go to 60 minutes because you can see how the character of the line changes. It's very thin here, and then it gets very nice, like right around here, 15 to 20 minutes. I love this. This is great for work on surfaces, like surface detail. Like if you're doing a portrait, you know, skin tone would be great for this. It's not a dominant line. Right around here, 15, 20 minutes, you know, that's great for more structural line work. And then your 30, 40, 60, and look at the 90 minutes. That's where your lines, you know, they do begin to break down a little bit because the nitric starts to spread and foul bite and underbite, and which is common with zinc. But, you know, you can get some really cool stuff, and you really want to allow the nitric acid to do the work for you. Instead of making your lines very aggressive and thick and pushing down hard with the needle, you know, make a nice thin line and just leave those lines in the acid for a longer period of time. You can do this in steps. So if I'm working on an artwork, I could do all of my structural outline, contour line kind of work first and do that for a single time, and then, you know, remove the hard ground, apply a fresh hard ground, and then start with all my finer details. And then I could, you know, break it up that way, or I could do it all at once. I could do all of the line work and put my plate in for different times. So this plate we're going to break up into about 8 sections. And one thing that I want to show too that can be very helpful with handling your plate, bringing it home and things like that, is just taking a piece of mat board. You know, that we've got lots of scrap mat board. We've got a drawer here full of it, and just cut yourself a small section like this. And then I can take a piece of tape, fold it over, like that, put it on my mat board, and now I have something that I can kind of maneuver around without like touching the edges and things like that. It's also a way that I can keep track of my times on my plate. So I'm gonna try and see if I can, it's almost 8 inches long, which is a good size. So we're gonna just break this up into 8 sections, and we'll do that right here. I'm not being like overly specific with this, you know, for brevity of the video. I'm just showing you, you know, like a very quick way of doing this. Okay, I'm gonna write top here just so I can keep track of it, and then I will go through and write down my time. So I'm just gonna think this out first. So if I do 1 minute, 2 minutes, 5, 10, 15, 20, 30, 40, so I'd be missing the 60, right? Let's see here, 2, 4, 8, 16. Yeah, I don't really want to do that. I might just go to 40 minutes with this one. Let's see. Or I could do 3, 5. Yeah, let's just do 1, 2, 5, 10, 15, 20, 30, 40, and I'm missing that 60. So like ideally, you know, you'd have 9 sections to this plate, but you know, it is what it is. We probably could have broken this up a little bit differently and made these little slices thinner, but that's okay. Now what I'm gonna do, you could approach this in a couple of different ways. What you might want to do is take your etching needle. Let's see if I have one up here. Yes, I do have an etching needle. If you buy your etching needle from a store, from the school store, you might need to hone the tip a little bit. Oh, that's interesting. My whetstone is missing. I'll bring a whetstone in and I'll demonstrate how to sharpen this. But essentially you put a little bit of oil. I've got some oil over there on a whetstone, and oh, actually I see my whetstone, so we will do this right now. Take a little 3-in-1 oil. Here is my whetstone. Somebody must have been using it. I should bring in a new one. This one is getting a little bit gummed up. I'd have to recondition this. Add a little bit of oil. Take my needle and at an angle, I'm just going to do small circular motions here. And I'm twisting my needle as I go. So you can see I'm kind of rocking it back and forth. And I want to retain a nice sharp point. So I don't want to come from an angle that's too sharp. I don't want to go at an angle that's too wide. I want something in between there. And I'm not putting a lot of pressure down. I'm just putting a little bit down. The needles, when you get them from the bookstore, will be pretty good, but they will have a little bit of a dull tip, and that's normal. So you might want to just, you know, test that tip on your fingertip, see if how it looks, how it feels. Look at it through a loop, and then do this if it's needed. So that looks pretty good. That feels good. This one could use a little bit more. I think this one might have been in the acid at some point. So lots of needles come and go in this studio. Mine are all labeled. I know which ones are mine, so it's much easier to tell. But if you're not sure, you know, you might want to do this. And it's good to have a variety of them. I like them, like this is still a little bit dull here, and it's got a little barb on it. Some people do it a little bit differently. They will pull it forward. Some people pull it and drag it like this and twist. I just kind of like to do circular motions. Okay, it's still a little dull. It does have a nice little sharp kind of tip on it, but this side is good, so I'm just going to use that side for now. But it's good that you got to see, you know, that little bit here. I'm going to put that back in here. I'll put the oil back in there as well. Hopefully that doesn't leak all over. Okay, so coming back to this this test strip, what I want to do now is just create a design. I can break this up with lines into sections and do like a same little drawing as I would like here with this egg, but you want to do a variety of different types of marks. So have some hatching that is close together, like here, hatching and cross hatching. Have some stippling in your design, have some lines that are farther apart to see how they close the gap, right? But what you want to do is just do something consistent. So, you know, you want to do the same for each section or something very similar where you can gauge how a longer period of time in the acid is going to affect your line work. I got a little bit of oil here. That won't hurt anything though. Okay, so I will probably do my little design and then I'll do another demonstration later in the week, and we'll record that and I'll make that available to you. But for now, I'm gonna go ahead and start doing a little design for this, and it'll probably be not very interesting, but it is what it is. So here's another example that I've done in the past. You can see, so it kind of goes like this. One little thing that you might want to do, as in here, is label your times on the plate itself. So when you print, you still have those, and you don't have, when you print them, the times are labeled on each section. What you want to consider though is if you want this to go that way, to read that way from left to right, and to have your numbers reading correctly, you need to flip everything. So I would actually do my times kind of over here to begin with. So I would write my 2, and I would write my 2 backwards here, and I would do my 4, but I would do it backwards here as well. So because when we print, the design is flipped and reversed, it's mirrored. So you need to consider that. There's always going to be something that happens, you know, somebody will always forget that at some point, and they'll be excited to use text and words in their design, but then they forget that they need to flip it around. So keep that in mind when you're planning for your prints. Okay, so that is all for today. We've done our beveling, we've cut our plates, we beveled them, we degreased them, and then we applied our hard ground, and we're about getting ready to print and etch. So next time we will be etching our plates in an acid bath, and we will be preparing paper, and we will be inking up our plates and printing from one of our presses here. Okay, Thank you, and see you soon.